So I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time now. I've worked at facilities in Texas and in Michigan. The oldest prison that I ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all of the paranormal experiences that I've had there, and in the other prisons that I've worked at as well. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts, I guess, before I started working as a correctional officer, that is. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts, 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner and I heard a loud banging sound. It was at like 3 in the morning at this point, so no prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was, and they, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit that we were working in was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small quiet cells in a hallway not directly visible from the officer station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime for prisoners, and the prisoner had actually choked on the food and died. To be honest, I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to it, and when I could see it, the door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. But there was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like that. I was at a loss for words, and later that night I checked the door again and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. It was a really weird experience, and it was definitely something that was, unexplainable. Anyway, another experience that I had was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning, and I was sitting inside the officer station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at the table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room, and there's no one sitting at the table that I just saw on the camera. I asked my partner to go and check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally just slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station and we both watch this video over and over, being just dumbstruck as to what we are seeing. Later on that same night, during one of my rounds, I notice a wet floor sign that got left out. I return it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station and look back to where the porter closet is, and I'll be damned, I see the same wet floor sign left out. I obviously asked my partner if they were playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away, but my partner denies doing anything with it. I go back out and make sure that I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door this time. I get back to the officer station, a wet floor sign right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now, and it starts to tip over on one end really slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground. It then proceeded to slide back up the hallway and then back to the front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I, we refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night that night because we were just terrified. One more notable one from Texas as well. I was working in an ad-seg unit, really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of the closed observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say that they're suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they're a lot cooler and are near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. And the prisoners told me that this is what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras, and all of a sudden we see a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually it comes to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy too. You see, I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell and I ask them if they're okay, and the prisoner tells me that something just doesn't feel right and that They're hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner calls for assistance because the prisoner had apparently tried to end it. But the weirdest thing is that apparently they were holding their wrists above their head and allegedly were speaking in tongues. Now, I wasn't there for that one, but with everything else that I'd seen in this place, and also knowing my partner the way that I did, I believe it. So, when I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that was now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I'd had there that it would be too long to get into. But like doors would slam, you would hear voices, cold chills, all that stuff. But the first really notable experience that I had was around Christmas time on the third shift. I was working in the oldest unit on the facility. Usually we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic and whatnot. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night watching TV in between them, when I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older unused condemned part of the prison. I open the door, take a look down the hallway, and a cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs just are standing all on end. I close the door, thoroughly creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again, but the TV starts flipping through channels rapidly, and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because, to be honest, I was pretty terrified again. But one day on the third shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch, when we decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, the old unstaffed gun towers, and we eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about maybe halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see because this section is so old that it's not powered. But the energy back there, I will never forget. Just being there filled me with a feeling of just utter dread. I asked my friend to head back, and we start to head back down to where the hallway to the gate was, when my friend's flashlight suddenly dies. When we make it back to the hallway, barely able to see anything in the almost pitch blackness, when we hear something running after us. So we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the key as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. And later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. It was a crazy and truly scary experience, and it was something that I hope to never, ever experience again. This is something that happened years ago, but the thought of it still keeps me up at night. I was walking through the hills of a provincial park with my dog during the winter, so the sun set much faster than I expected, and before I could get back to my car, it was already dark. Once the sun was gone and all you could see was darkness, I was walking slowly through a field, when out of nowhere I had, to this day, the most gut-wrenching, undeniable feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, and in the distance I saw a figure standing there, darker than the night sky around us. The instant that I saw him, my stomach dropped and my body literally froze. I knew in that moment somehow that he was coming for me. I grabbed my dog's leash and we booked it. Sprinting full speed up and down the hills, around the trees, down embankments. I was running so fast as if my life was dependent on it. And to this day, I'm pretty sure that it was. I make the 30 to 45 minute trip in 10, and all that stands before me and my car is this switchback. You have to sort of go back and forth up if you want to reach the top. So once again, I'm giving it all I got, running up this switchback as fast as I possibly can. And once I reach the top and look back down, who else but this person is chasing me, And he gets up the switchback like how any sane person would. Of course not. He starts sprinting right up the middle of this switchback, heading straight for me. I scream at him to leave me alone, and he doesn't say anything. Not a single word, just continues running right at me. I am so lucky that my car was at the top of this hill, because as I ran towards it, just like in the horror movies, I dropped my keys and I was fiddling with them trying to open the door. Just in time too, I get the door open, throw my dog in it, and shut the door behind me, just as this guy reaches us. The best part is that there were no other vehicles parked anywhere around us, but where did this person park? Yeah, right next to me of all places. Now, this guy literally jumps into his truck so quickly, and to this day I've never seen a better example of speeds out of there like a bat out of hell. He guns the engine so hard, black smoke is blasting out of the back as he swerves out of there, leaving skid marks behind him. I sat in the back of my vehicle for hours afterwards, shaking and crying, knowing that I was this close to whatever he had planned for me. And that's why I'm sharing this story, in the hopes that people won't ignore that gut feeling, the little voice in the back of your head that tells you to run. If I didn't that day, I never would have noticed him in time and would have had the heads... If I didn't that day, I never would have noticed him in time and wouldn't have had the head start that I needed to escape. Always trust your gut feelings and intuitions, because it might really be the deciding factor in if this is your final day on Earth or not. This all happened about a decade ago at a travel center in New Mexico. I worked the night shift as a prep cook there, and while there I had a few strange experiences that I'd like to share with you. So, the first was pretty standard. I was chopping onions, and out of the corner of my eye I see a figure walk past me and stop in the corner. When I turned to look, nobody was there, and I felt the base of my spine go ice cold. Now, to clarify, my family has history with, paranormal stuff. Had a great-grandma who was a medium. I used to see shadow figures all the time in my childhood home until I was 15 or so, and then started seeing them again when I was in a deep depression with tendencies, much better now, in my early 20s. That chill down my spine always accompanied these experiences though, and I use it as a bit of an indicator that something is near. Anyway, after that first experience, I started to ask around, and this was a common occurrence here. In fact, 3 or 4 people had the exact same thing happen. Busy with a task, a dark figure at the edge of their vision walks by. When they turn to look, it's gone. It would happen again occasionally, but I would just ignore it. The second wasn't a single incident, but something that happened regularly, usually after seeing it in the corner of my eye again. Part of my job as a prep cook was making large batches of soup and chilies for the next day. I'd put these 5-gallon pots on the burners with the meat to start browning, turn to chop the veggies, and when I'd turn back, all my burners would be off. Fairly innocuous, but it happened too often for it to be an error, and again it was accompanied by a chill in my spine. But the final incident actually happened to someone else, but I was present for it. To explain as well, here is a quick rundown of how our walk-in is laid out. So, the door was in the prep kitchen. Inside the walk-in was a second door that led to our freezer. The freezer had its own light switch that was located in the regular walk-in fridge. So, the line cook goes into the walk-in. I think nothing of it until he comes out a few minutes later wanting to kick my butt. After I calm him down, he tells me that he was in the freezer section when all of a sudden the lights turn out and he starts hearing a man laughing coming from the main walk-in. I let him know that not only was it not me, but I'd been in the kitchen the whole time and nobody else had gone in. He goes white as a sheet at this and didn't want to talk about it anymore. So, those are my experiences at the truck stop. Thankfully, I don't have much contact with the other side now that I'm in a better headspace, but I have a couple of others from my time in New Mexico that I might share at some point in the future. For now, it feels good to get this off my chest, and I just want to say thanks for listening.